Hey guys, Buick update 38 here. So I'm a little over 1,000 miles on the new engine, and everything has pretty much been going great. It runs and drives great, and after getting some of the exhaust stuff figured out and getting some of the noises figured out, primarily the main issue was getting this downpipe and getting a crush ring in there so that it wouldn't make nearly as bad of an exhaust leak sound as it used to. But after installing that, it really was just running great, and I was just having a great time. And I started at 6 psi, then I installed the boost controller, and I've just kind of been tuning my way up, and I'm up to 12.5 at this point, and it'll do a roll and burn out real easy in first and second. And I got to take my dad for a little cruise when he was here, and oh my God! It was pretty fun. That worked out pretty nice. So I think that was at probably 8 or 9 psi. It was plenty powerful. It was running great, and since then I pretty much just continued to add psi and tune. And then when I got to 12.5 psi, started hearing this clicking sound, and it was just the most annoying thing, because I swear it's just clicking sounds in this engine haunt me. The thing was, it was still running great, wasn't burning oil, no white smoke. You know, everything was running fine, but it just bugged me just enough to where I decided to take it back apart, marked all the push rods, and ran it without the valve cover, make sure they were all still spinning, make sure I didn't wipe a lobe. Then I just kind of ran it for a little bit more, but afterward I kind of took it back apart just to take another look and kind of see what was going on. So unfortunately I'm gonna have to lash the valves again for like the 6th time at this point. But basically I just took it off, and I just could not possibly think of what the sound was. And the thing that was so confusing about it is that the sound oscillates in and out sometimes. Like it'll go like click click click, and then it'll stop, then it'll go click 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 click, and then it'll stop, click 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 click, and stop. But it sounds like this. This is after a fresh drive and it's all hot. And I just could not for the life of me think of what would possibly cause something like that. And the only thing that ever came to mind that would have made any type of sense, because if this was like piston slap or, you know, a thrown rod or a main or something, it just would have been constant, and it would have been with the RPM of the engine. But the thing was, is it was at about 400 beats per minute, which means that it would have had to have been something valve train related. So the only thing that really made sense is if I had a bent push rod. So if the push rod is moving, so in these engines they have little slots for the push rod to move up and down in. So the only thing I could possibly think of is if it was ever so slightly bent, it would make a click, click, and then it would move in the channel in that slight bend, and then as it rotated back, it would start hitting the other wall and click, 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 nothing, 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 click, 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 then it would move in the slot. And unfortunately, I just took all of the push rods out and checked them all, and they all seemed fine. I rolled them on my workbench, and none of them look particularly bad. They all check out fine. I mean, the only thing that did surprise me was that, let's see if I can find one of them. So there are wear patterns, obviously, for where it rides in the head. On a couple of these push rods, there was a very slight bluing on the metal of where it was wearing, so obviously it was getting pretty hot, but I mean, it was just like a tiny patch. The only thing I can think of is that maybe just because these push rod guides are so tight that maybe it's just ever so slightly contacting the wall and causing that oscillating sound. Because the other thing I checked, I went and bought a borescope, and checked out the pistons. And this is my number 6 piston. So while I was tuning, I was obviously playing with the timing and adding a few degrees here and there. And by the time I got to 10 psi, I was trying to tune 0 psi, wide open throttle, and then get that curve correct for total timing, and then back down as it starts to pull timing as I get into boost. So I got my total timing pretty solid for wide open throttle. I think it's at 26 degrees, or yeah, 26 degrees, I believe. But then as I got into higher boost, the 6 to 12 psi range, I added, it was running great at I think 9 degrees, and I just added a couple just to see what it would do. And I started hearing detonation in my dead ears, because I ride around with these big earmuffs with a tube that goes to the side of the block, so I can hear it like a giant stethoscope essentially. And I got it, I heard detonation for just a split second in boost, then got out, dropped the timing back, it ran better, everything was fine. But it's really interesting to see these pictures on the boroscope. This is my number 6 cylinder, and you can see at the bottom there, there are some craters in the piston, but also you can see the aluminum on the top of the head next to the exhaust valve. That exhaust valve has a few little aluminum flakes, but what's interesting is I thought that was a crack in the head, but that's actually just a shadow. So here's the next cylinder, this is number 5, and this is where it gets interesting. So that has a little bit of detonation, a little bit of aluminum, I'm assuming from this same event. A few flakes on it. That is the, I think that's the intake, and a few flakes on it. Here's the next cylinder, number 4. Fewer flakes. Piston looks much better. Still, you know, a few detonation holes. Number 3, much wetter, and some carbon buildup, but you can see not really much detonation. Just, you know, a couple of aluminum flakes. The valve looks good. I can't really see maybe, but a couple tiny specks. And then as you get to number 2, very wet. I don't really see hardly any aluminum on it, and that looks fine. And really basically no aluminum on the valve, maybe a speck or 2. And then lastly, number 1, very wet, almost entirely carbon, and maybe like 1 flake or 2 flakes on the valves. So it's very interesting, and that also made me think more about how this car is set up. So one of the things I did to improve the drivability was I added this progressive secondary linkage, so that as I drive off the primaries until about 40%, and then it starts to open the secondaries. And what's interesting about that is that because this throttle body is so incredibly large for this engine, the smallest one they sell that's a 4-barrel is a 600 CFM or 650 CFM throttle body. And because of that, it's very interesting because I can get into boost, quite a bit of boost under 40% throttle. So because of that, it keeps these front cylinders, because the primaries are closer to these front cylinders, it seems like these front cylinders run much richer than the rear cylinders. And I actually confirmed that in this picture from all of the, when I pulled all the spark plugs, and you can see that the number, they're ordered in the same pattern that I pulled them in, and you can see that the left side are running much richer than the rear, which is reading pretty much lean. So because of that, that's a great tuning tip. I either need to run more throttle or I need to make sure that I have a lower target AFR so that I don't burn out my rear cylinders. But other than that, I'm just kind of at a loss because everything runs great. Those boroscope images don't show any wear on the sidewalls like there would be if there was significant piston slap. I went back and checked some of my older videos, and it seems like that sound was either always there or only got slightly worse. But for all I know, it can honestly just be after 1,000 miles on a fresh engine. I might just need to relash the valves. It might just be part of engine break-in. I think total I'm at like probably 1,300 miles or maybe, yeah, probably 1,300 miles. It's been probably 700 maybe since I last lashed the valves, but everything else is running great. My tune is really spot on. I'm just hoping that I can get to 15 PSI and maybe call it a day, because I'm not sure how much these stock rods will hold. Because I'm also keeping the RPM limited to 4,500 currently. I think it can probably spin up to 55 or maybe 6, but I'll probably keep it under 5,000 or 5,200. That's my main rev limiter once I'm feeling a bit more comfortable. But gosh dang, man, it scoots. It scoots real good. It's a heck of a car. It's really fast. It's a lot of fun to drive. The boost comes in quick. Honestly, even if this thing blows, now I have a couple of backups. So I just went and bought a couple extra engines just so I have something else. This is a 250 and this is actually a 230. And also the other thing is these are emissions heads. So this is a hot air injection tube. So hopefully those can get closed off or sealed. I probably plan to send these out to Tom Lowe and have him do a similar build on my head. Finally have a couple extra blocks, so hopefully I can find some other Ross Racing pistons and build a similar short block and send this head off so that I can slap it on, slap on some of my other stuff, because that gives me some peace of mind that I'm not doing all the other parts for nothing in case some of this goes south. So once I get this all back together, I'll try and go over some of the adjustments I've made. It's been a lot of fun tuning everything. It's been quite a learning experience, especially with the progressive throttle linkage, because the amount of extra air that the secondaries let in really threw everything off. And honestly, for the first 600, 800 miles, I wasn't even using the secondaries. That's how big this throttle body is. And I could get up to 6, 8, 10 PSI just fine. It might have just come in a little slower, but other than that, thanks for watching, guys.